Never Known Peace is the debut full-length album from Doomsday, an Oakland, California-based crossover thrash metal band who started out as more of a metallic hardcore group. And the metal influences seem to have taken over. They've got members of Spinebreaker and Ripped to Shreds in their past and present, and they really caught on with their sound, which makes sense because a lot of these people started out in bands that were either metal punk or thrash related. The big influence here is clearly like Iron Age and Power Trip. The Texas side of modern crossover is very strong in what they do, and it makes sense that they kind of caught on tour with bands like Dead Heat and Mutually Assured Destruction, because they are kind of that heavier, angrier side of crossover in the modern day. They only have some tangential influence from the old 80s stuff. Now, my interest in crossover really starts and ends in the 80s and then maybe the mid 90s, before the alternative rock side of things started. So for me, the thrash metal side of it is really important, but so is the hardcore punk and the tuneful side of it as well. You know, bands like Suicidal Tendencies and all that are still important to me as a place where I started and moved into metal. For this band, this is something that is removed from that almost entirely and has more in common with maybe like a band like Madball and of course Iron Age and Power Trip. And they're not exactly emulating that sound, but they're working with that modern standard for crossover in terms of production values and whatnot. So as I say in the review, they aren't really putting on a big show like High Command with the high fantasy side of things, and they're not really sticking with the tunefulness of a band like Take Offense. This is much more a riff oriented, solo slinging, very much a guitar oriented band, and it's going to appeal to people who like riffs. And so that's kind of why I'm talking about them, and I'll show you what I mean. We'll cut to a clip here and get a sense for their sound and how much they're really winging it with those 80s dive bomb guitars and whatnot. So these guys are obviously a bit younger. They probably grew up and learned about hardcore in the late 90s. And so I can hear shades, not necessarily of Hatebreed, but of like Terror and whatnot when they do lean to the metallic hardcore side of things. And you can find that in their earlier releases. It does sound a little bit more in that direction. But on this record, the production values have been boosted so much, and the general talent of the lead guitarists who are just shredding all over this thing really take over with their riffs, and this becomes a guitar record from my point of view. There are a couple of catchier songs. The vocalist really barks it out in kind of a Freddie Christian kind of way without being quite as verbose. You kind of get that sense that this is a very much a West Coast hardcore influence kind of thing from my point of view. That doesn't necessarily defeat the crossover side of it, but it gives it some of its own flavor. And I think that's what's cool about this record, is that if you're familiar with 90s hardcore and just West Coast stuff in general, these guys aren't necessarily trying to sound like anything in particular of what's going on right now, but it is a modern sounding record in that sense, and it is very well curated. Lots of catchier songs, a lot of shorter punkish songs, to the point where I think that the important thing to say to any fan of crossover, especially the older heads who are really looking for the 80s style, everything this band does for the most part will stick in terms of the guitar performances, the gang shouts, the shorter songs, and kind of will function in the brain of someone who's interested in 80s hardcore and 90s to a certain degree. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites of the month, but it is undeniably well made. It is very well written. It is tight down to the last detail, and produced within an inch of its life. It's really a great sounding record. So if you're looking for something that really cuts into that metal punk mindset but keeps it clean and keeps it metal, I think this is, for me, a really great medium where crossover should sit more often here in the modern day. So just a fine example of this crossover of styles, and a standout here in March. So check it out for yourself. It released on March 28th, and read my review for more of my thoughts in depth.